The knife was halfway through the second layer when my aunt set her fork down hard enough for the whole yard to hear it. 31 people watched my son push both hands into the frosting with his name on it. Adelaide, my mother's older sister, the woman who has run the same preschool for 26 years, smiled at the table and said, loud enough for the back row, "Sweetheart, how much longer are we all going to stand out here pretending that boy came out of your husband?" Nobody laughed. A folding chair squeaked on the patio stone. My neighbor's daughter stopped halfway through handing out plates and stood there holding 2 of them. I kept cutting. Adelaide did not stop. She turned in her seat so the whole yard got her profile, the way she does at graduations, and she said my husband's name out loud. She asked him to tell everyone what he had already told her. She used the word honest twice. Anders was standing by the cooler with a beer he had not opened. He is a certified public accountant. He has spent 11 years explaining numbers to frightened people in a voice that makes them sit back down. He had every one of those years available to him right then. He looked at the grass and said, "We're going to get it cleared up. Not she's wrong, not that's my son, cleared up, the way you'd say it about a billing error." 31 people heard him pick that sentence, and every one of them started doing arithmetic behind their eyes. Emery was 1 year old that afternoon. He had frosting to his wrists and no idea that the adults around his high chair had just started deciding, out loud, what he was going to be called. Then Adelaide stood up and walked down to the high chair. She took a napkin off the table, leaned over my son, and began wiping the frosting off his chin while she talked. She said it gently. She said a child deserves to know who he is. She said it with 2 fingers under his jaw, turning his face left and right in front of everybody, the way you'd hold up a receipt to the light. My thumb pressed a half moon into the icing on the handle. That was the only part of me that moved. I finished the slice. I set the knife face down on the plate. Then I took my phone out of my back pocket, typed 4 lines with my thumb while she was still talking, and pressed send. It went to the Health Information Management Office at Mercy Ridge, not the fertility center. A different department, in a different wing, that has never had a reason to speak to my husband. Then I said 1 sentence. I said it to the top of my aunt's head, because she was still bent over my son's chair. "Before you tell him who he is, we should probably talk about the box you signed at that hospital in 2019. She let go of his face. She set her plate down on the table and walked out to her car before anyone had cleared a single fork. I could have finished it right there, but my son is going to watch this someday, and I was not going to hand him a first birthday people remembered for the wrong 30 seconds. She thinks I said it because she made me angry. I said it because 90 seconds earlier I had asked a second department at that hospital for 1 document, one my husband has never once thought about, and I needed to know how fast she would get to her car and call him. 31 paper plates still had cake on them. Emery clapped because somebody had stood up. 7 years ago, in the parking structure at that same hospital, that man cut a paper bracelet off my wrist and told me to keep it. Level 2. He called it day 1 of our family. My name is Myra Langford. I'm 29 years old, and I'm going to tell you this the way it happened, in order, including the parts where I look slow. If you have ever been the calmest person in a room where other people were deciding something about you, stay with me to the end of this one. And if the story is worth your afternoon, subscribe. That's all I'll ask you for. The party ended 40 minutes early. Nobody announced it. People just started finding their keys. My cousin's husband carried the folding table back to the garage without being asked, which is what men do when they want a reason to be facing away from you. 2 women rinsed cups at my sink and talked about the weather in the voices people use at hospitals. I wrapped the cake in foil, all of it. There was most of it left. By 7:30, the phones had started. You can watch a family group chat run through a house the way you can watch weather cross a parking lot, heads tipping down one after another in a wave at the far end first. Anders stayed outside. He stood at the edge of the patio with his back to the sliding glass door, phone at his ear, one hand cupped around the bottom of it. He was out there long enough for the motion light to give up and switch off, and then he moved his shoulder to bring it back on and kept talking. I ran a sponge along the counter and watched the back of my husband's head through my own reflection. I was not calling a lawyer. It was the 3rd call he had taken since my aunt got into her car. Emery went down at 8, on his stomach, one fist against the crib slats. I waited until the monitor showed him gone. Then I got the shoebox down from the closet shelf, the one with his hospital hat in it, and the 2 ultrasound strips, and a ticket stub from a concert neither of us liked. The paper bracelet was at the bottom, curled the way paper stays curled. I carried it to the kitchen and laid it on the counter next to a page from the copies the fertility center had sent me 2 days before the party. Certified. Stamped. Every page numbered by their office, not mine. The bracelet says admitted at 7:12, pre-anesthetic at 8:05. The form beside it is called Consent for Use of Donor Gametes, and the center's timestamp on it reads 8:41. I read both times out loud once, in an empty kitchen, to hear how they sounded next to each other. Then I put them in a folder and washed a bottle, because that is what you do next. The other thing happened while I was washing that bottle, and I didn't know about it for 2 days. One of my guests was the mother of a boy who went through Larkspur Lane Early Learning Center 4 years ago. She had her phone out for the candles. She got 9 seconds, my aunt's voice, the word pretending, 31 people not moving, and she put it in the parent group for the school where Adelaide has collected consent signatures for 26 years. Field trips, fever medication, photograph releases, that woman's signature line on every one of them. By 9 the next morning, the chair of her board had texted her twice. My aunt spent a lifetime being the person who decides which children's paperwork is in order. Her voice was now going out to the phones of parents who had trusted her to say so, and it had gotten there without me touching anything. When I was 11 years old, I sat in a car outside my grandmother's house with a bag of freezer ice against my cheekbone, and the adults were inside deciding who I was going to live with. I could see the shapes of them through the front window. The engine was off. The ice melted and ran down inside my collar. Nobody came out to get me. When the door finally opened, it was to tell me the answer. I have never once been afraid of a hard conversation. I am afraid of the ones that happen in a room I'm not in. At 11 that night, my aunt left a voicemail. She did not apologize. She talked for 50 seconds about how she has always said what needed saying and how one day I would thank her. And then at the end, in the loose voice of a woman who has poured herself a second glass, she said it. "Your husband told me you'd started calling the clinic." That was all. She moved straight on to whether I'd frozen the leftover cake. I played it twice, standing in the dark hallway outside my son's door. I had not called the clinic. I had not called anyone. But 2 weeks ago somebody had told her that I had, and she had believed it enough to build a scene around it in front of 31 people. She didn't come up with that on her own. She was loaded. And the man who loaded her needed the whole family to hear the accusation from outside our marriage first, so that when he said it himself, he would only be agreeing. Anders came home at 1 in the morning. He didn't turn on the lamp. He sat on the edge of the bed with his back to me and took his shoes off one at a time and said, into the dark, that everybody was going to keep talking until there was a piece of paper, and that we should just do the test and be done with it. I said, "You pick the lab, I'll sign whatever they need." He turned his head part way. He had been braced for an hour of something, and I had given him 9 words. "Okay," he said. "Okay, good." There was mail on the kitchen island when I came down for water. His pile, not mine. The top envelope had the Holloway and Strand return address on it, and it was already open, and the letter was folded back so the header showed. Independent review of client trust accounts, scheduled for September. He came down behind me for a glass and slid the whole stack into his work bag in one motion, faster than a man moves for junk mail, and asked if we had any of the ibuprofen left. I said it was in the cabinet over the stove. Then I opened the calendar that hangs on the side of the refrigerator, the one with the dentist and the daycare deposit on it, and I drew a small circle around September in pencil. I didn't tell anybody. I just wanted to know how many weeks he had. On the 30th of June, I sat at the Health Information Management counter and signed a request form while a woman named Dessa Corrigan counted my pages out loud at $1 and change per page. She was pleasant about it. She said the anesthesia record and the monitoring chart came from a different pull than the clinic material, that it would take about a week, and did I want it certified? I said yes. Certified is the whole point. Certified means a person in that department signs a statement that this is a true copy of what is in their system, and that statement travels with the paper. While I waited, I went back through the first batch, the one the fertility center had already sent me. Page after page of things I had lived through. My weight. The consent for the surgery itself, which I did sign at 7:40 in my own handwriting with my own flat M on it. And then a page I had no reason to care about. A copy of a lab inventory log. Rows of vial numbers, dates, initials. One number in the middle of the page had been written over, not crossed out, written over in pencil, another number pressed into the same space, and beside it, 2 letters and a date in a small, tight hand. RK-05-2019. I looked at it for maybe 8 seconds. It was strange enough that I took a picture of it with my phone. Then I turned the page because I was not looking for that. I was looking for a signature. Dessa called my name. I put the folder in my bag and forgot about the photograph for 6 weeks. That night I got the audit letter back out of the recycling drawer. It had come on the 3rd of June, and I had read it standing up, holding a spoon. A routine records review, the center said. New state requirements. Please confirm the following information for our file. There was a checkbox partway down. Type of donor gamete used. 4 weeks earlier, I had decided it was a template. Everybody gets the same form, I'd thought. Somebody in an office had failed to strip out the fields that didn't apply to us. I did not call the center. That was the one rule I gave myself, and I want to be honest about why. Not restraint. Sequence. The second you call, you become a person who is asking questions, and people who answer phones start putting notes in files about you. I wanted my documents to arrive to a woman nobody had thought about yet. So instead I put the 2 stacks side by side on the table. Consent for use of donor gametes. 3 signature boxes on it. Patient, witness, spouse. I sign my name maybe 40 times a week. The M I make starts with a downstroke and comes back up flat. The M on that form comes up with a hook on it. Same page lower down in the summary block, 5 embryos cryopreserved. 5. One of them was asleep upstairs. I had spent 7 years believing I knew where the other 4 came from, and I had been the only one in the room who thought anything at all. 2 days later, Anders came home with a drugstore bag. He set a home DNA kit on the dining table, an inch from the edge, 2 hand widths from my son's high chair, and he told me he was doing it for me. His word. For you. So the family would shut up. He said he hated that it had come to this, and he said it in a voice with a little sag in it, the same one he uses on the phone with clients who are behind on payroll taxes. I looked at the box. I did not open it. I did not tell him to take it back. I did not say a word about it at all, then or later. And I want to be precise here, because it matters. I never once suggested that he do anything. I moved Emery's bowl to the other side of the table so his arm wouldn't knock the box off, and I went and started the bath. That night, an automated message came in from the hospital. Request received. In processing. Somewhere in a records queue in a building my husband had no reason to think about, there was now a line with my name on it and a date on it, and it was going to sit there getting older whether anyone remembered it or not. Emery started teething on the 2nd and screamed for most of 2 nights. I had him against my shoulder at 2 a.m. with the phone wedged under my ear, shaking a bottle of infant acetaminophen with one hand and reading the June letter again with the other, because I could not sleep anyway. That's when I went past the line. It's on the 2nd page, in the paragraph under the checkbox, in the same size type as everything around it. Depending on the results of this review, you may be among the patients required to be notified. Required, not may wish to be. Required by somebody of somebody. Emery arched his back and dropped the pacifier behind the couch, and I turned the page and never came back to it. In the morning, the home kit result landed in my husband's email. 0%. I didn't say anything about it. He ate a full dinner. He rinsed the dishes and stacked them the way he likes them stacked. He asked if the sitter was confirmed for Thursday. Then he went upstairs before I did, which he has never done in 9 years, and I lay on the couch and listened to him not sleeping. He waited a day. Then he took a screenshot of the number and put it in the family group chat. 22 people, my mother, my aunt, 2 of my cousins, my brother-in-law, an uncle in Grand Junction who has never once texted me. Under the screenshot he wrote, "I'm sorry I let this go on as long as I did." Adelaide was the first heart on it, 11 seconds. My phone did not stop for 20 minutes. Some of it was cruelty, and some of it was worse than cruelty. 3 separate people sent me the crying face and nothing else, which is what you send a woman you have already convicted and feel sorry for. 31 people had stood in my yard. Now 31 people had an opinion, and every one of those opinions had been formed by a document my husband had chosen to publish himself. I didn't have to do that. He could have taken that number to a lawyer's office in an envelope. Instead, he put it in writing, with a timestamp, in front of 22 witnesses, and he attached his own apology to it. He had just picked the only ground where he could not win, and he picked it in public, and he picked it first. On the 6th of July, Dessa slid a stack across the counter with a red stamp on the cover sheet and counted the pages out loud again, and I said thank you twice. I didn't open it in the lobby. I didn't open it in the elevator. I took it down to the parking structure, and I drove past 2 empty rows on the ground floor so I could park on level 2. Level 2 is where he cut the bracelet off. Same concrete, same yellow numbers on the pillars, same smell of exhaust and cold stone in a place that never gets warm. I was 22 and had just had a needle in me and could not stop shaking, and he was so gentle with the key that it took him 3 tries. I sat with the engine off for 10 minutes with the stack face down on my knees. I had wanted to be wrong. I want that on the record. Right up until level 2, I was still building the version where all of it was a clerical mess, and somebody in an office had been sloppy in 2019, and my husband was a coward, but not a liar. Then I turned the car on and drove home, because the sitter charges by the hour. I opened it at 9:40 that night after Emery went down. Anesthesia record, 21st of May, 2019. Admitted, 7:12. IV placed, 7:51. Pre-anesthetic sedation administered, 8:05. And then, in a nurse's shorthand in the monitoring column, patient not responsive to verbal from 8:07. I read that line 3 times. It is a small line. It exists so that a hospital can prove it was watching. What it says is that at 7 minutes past 8 in the morning, on the 21st of May, I stopped being a person who could agree to anything. I stood up. I did not go back to the papers. I went down the hall and put my hand flat on my son's back and left it there until I had counted 10 breaths in and out under my palm. Then I went back to the kitchen. I laid them on the counter next to each other, and I turned on the light over the stove so there wouldn't be any shadow on the print. On the left, the anesthesia record, stamped by the Department of Anesthesiology, certified by Health Information Management, 8:05. On the right, consent for use of donor gametes, stamped by the Mercy Ridge Fertility Center, a separate department that shares a parking structure with the first one and nothing else. Time of execution, 8:41. 36 minutes. Witness line, Adelaide Fenn. Relationship to patient, in her own handwriting, in her own beautiful preschool director cursive, aunt. Spouse line, Anders Quinlan, his real signature, the one he puts on other people's tax returns. Patient line, an M with a hook on it. 2 departments, 2 stamps. 2 people who have never met, each certifying their own timestamp, neither knowing what the other one's paper would end up sitting next to. Nobody on this earth can say I put those 2 pages together. They were always together. It just took 7 years for anyone to hold them at the same time. The next evening, he asked me to write something. He came into the kitchen with his laptop open against his forearm, the way he carries it when he has already drafted the thing he is about to pretend we are discussing. And he said the family was tearing itself apart, and somebody had to be the adult. He had written a message for me to send to the group chat, from my number, in my name. 2 paragraphs. The first one thanked everyone for their concern. The second one said that Anders and I were handling a private medical matter privately, that we asked for grace, and that whatever came out of it, we both loved Emery very much. Whatever came out of it. He read it to me standing up, and then he turned the laptop around so I could see it and said, "You just paste it. It's better coming from you." Of course it was better coming from me. If I sent it, then I was a woman asking her family for grace, and every person on that chat would have had my own text message in their pocket as the moment I stopped denying anything. I looked at it for a few seconds. "I'm not going to send that," I said. He waited for the rest. The fight, the tears, the 2 hours. That was what the laptop was for. I picked my son up off the floor and put him on my hip and told my husband there was chicken in the oven for another 11 minutes, and I went upstairs to run the bath. Behind me, I heard him close the laptop and stand there in the kitchen with it, not moving, for a good while. I did not confront him. I want to be clear that this was not strength. I have a temper. What I had was a kitchen table with 2 certified pages on it, and the understanding that the moment I said one word to my husband, he would start building. On the 8th of July, his filings came through. A petition to disestablish paternity. Nothing else, not yet. So on the 9th of July, I sat down across from Theodora Rusk, a family lawyer on the 6th floor of a building on 17th Street, and I laid the file out in the order I had put it in. Rusk is 52 and reads paper the way a mechanic listens to an engine. Head slightly turned, no expression at all. She went through the whole thing without a word. She stopped on the anesthesia record for a long time. She stopped on the consent form for longer. Then she took her glasses off and said something that sounded, that afternoon, like advice for a woman who was going to have to be patient. "Don't stop him from doing anything," she said. "Anything at all. Everything he files is sworn paper." I said I understood. I did not understand. I thought she meant that he would embarrass himself and that I should let him. Then she asked the question she is required to ask. Did I want to contest the paternity action? No, I said. She was quiet for a second. In her business, that is a woman giving up. I went further. I signed a written consent, my own consent this time, in my own hand, at a desk, awake, agreeing to genetic testing at an accredited laboratory with a documented chain of custody. And when Rusk read me the 2 labs his attorney had already proposed, I picked the more expensive one, the one that does its own collection and keeps its own custody log. I was paying for it. Rusk typed something into the file and did not explain herself, and I did not ask her to. I only asked one question. How long does his side have to produce the results? They'll want it fast, she said. They always do. You should know there was a move on the board by then. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. What I'm not going to do is tell you what it was, because that afternoon I did not fully know either. I knew what I had asked for, and I knew who had signed what. I did not know yet which piece of paper my husband was going to have to hand a judge in order to win. She wrote 2 words on a legal pad, turned the pad face down, and asked whether I had any money he couldn't see. I did as it happened, not much of it. There is a credit union on Colfax where I opened an account when I was 19 and working nights, before I was anybody's wife, and I had never closed it because closing accounts is a thing you have to make time for. There was a little over $4,000 in it, most of it from a settlement my grandmother left me. On the 11th of July, a Saturday, I drove down there in the morning, while they still keep the vault open until noon, and rented a safe deposit box. Box 214, bottom row, the size they use for coin collections and army discharge papers. The woman who took me back had to hold my son's diaper bag while I turned my key in the second lock, because you need 2 hands. I put 1 complete certified set in it. The clinic file, the anesthesia record, the monitoring chart, all of it, in the envelopes with the department seals unopened on 2 of them. The second set went into a folder at the bottom of my work bag, which never leaves my body. And then, sitting in the parking lot afterward with the engine running and the air conditioning on Emery's feet, I photographed every single page on my phone and mailed the whole thing to an email address on a service my husband has never once had a password for. 3 copies, 3 places, one of them behind a lock that takes a court order or my own face to open. I want to be exact about what I felt in that parking lot, because it was not triumph. It was the flat relief of a woman who has finally gotten a heavy thing off the floor and onto a shelf. Then the bill came due socially, which is its own kind of arithmetic. My mother called on a Tuesday. Corinne is Adelaide's younger sister by 6 years and has spent her whole life half a step behind her, and she did not call to ask how I was. She talked around it for 4 minutes. Then she said, "Your aunt has done more for this family than you know." I asked her what that meant. She said she wasn't going to get into it, and that I had always been hard, and that Anders was under a lot of pressure at work. The school board finished its review that same week. Adelaide told them the video had been cut, that it was 9 seconds out of an hour, that anyone can be made to sound like anything. 2 board members had children in her first rooms, back when the building was still a church annex. They accepted her explanation, and she went back to work on the Monday, and I heard about it because she posted a photograph of her own classroom door with a heart under it. At my office, a woman I have eaten lunch with for 4 years stopped by my desk and asked if I was okay in the specific voice people use when they have already read the group chat. I said I was fine, and I meant it, which was somehow the loneliest part. The worst one came in a daycare parking lot. My cousin Deirdre caught me at the fence line on a Thursday at 5:40 with her own kid on her hip, and she had clearly been waiting for the car because she started before I had the strap off my shoulder. She said she wasn't taking sides. Then she took one for 4 minutes. She said Anders was destroyed. She said he had cried on the phone to her husband. She said everyone understood that things happen in a marriage, and that if I would just tell the truth now, before lawyers got into it, the family would forgive it and we could all move forward. I stood there with a diaper bag and a lunchbox and let her finish. Then I asked her one question, because I was curious in a cold way about the architecture of what she believed. "When do you think I did it?" She said she didn't want details. "No, I'm asking about the calendar," I said. "Emery was conceived from an embryo frozen in 2019. Anders drove me to the transfer in 2024 and held the door. Which month am I supposed to have done this in?" She looked at me for about 2 seconds. You could watch the arithmetic start and then get put away in a drawer, unfinished, because finishing it would have cost her a great deal more than not finishing it. She said she really had to get Griffin home. That is the whole shape of it. Nobody in that group chat had to believe my husband. They only had to prefer him. He had brought the first agreement to the house on the 10th of July, the night before I rented that box, and he had not come alone. The woman with him put her bag down on Emery's high chair. "Adrienne Pike," he said, "from the office. She manages the practice. She signed off on my billing for 4 years. She's just here for the paperwork side." She was 41, in a blazer at 7 in the evening, and she had the specific ease of a person who has been in a house before. She knew which cabinet the glasses were in. She didn't open it. She just looked at it first. The agreement was 4 pages. I would vacate by the end of August. I would take 1/3 of the equity, which he had already calculated, at a valuation he had already obtained. No support of any kind in either direction, because page 3, in that flat drafting voice, the parties acknowledge that no child of the marriage exists. No child of the marriage exists. Upstairs, the child of the marriage was asleep with his foot through the crib slats. Adrienne was there to number the pages and take 1 copy back with her. Anders read the terms out himself, clause by clause, in the voice he uses on clients. He said the words simply 4 times. I looked at her handbag sitting on the tray of my son's high chair, on the strap marks and the crumbs, and I told them my lawyer would read it, and I asked for 2 days. Anders said take 3. He was generous the way you are when you already have the thing. On the 12th, I sat down at that table and told my husband I couldn't do this. I said it plainly. I said I did not have it in me to fight him in a courtroom for a year with a baby and a job. I said I'd be out by the end of August. I said I only wanted Emery and that I would not ask him for $1. I watched something come loose in his shoulders. He said, careful, that he thought that was the mature choice. He said he'd always known I was the reasonable one. He got the pen out of his own jacket, and I signed the draft. A draft is not an agreement. It does not bind anybody. Rusk had told me that on the phone in 11 words, and then she had told me not to say anything else about it. I went out to the back step to make a call before I had capped the pen. He didn't go to the end of the yard this time. He stood in the doorway, half in, and I heard him say her name, and then, in a voice I had not heard in about 2 years, "It's done, it's done, it's actually done." I was laughing. You know things now that he did not know standing in that doorway. You know what came out of a records office on the 6th of July. You know what I signed on the 9th, and you know I picked the expensive lab. I knew he had won a woman's signature on a Sunday. That night I packed the first of Emery's boxes. I did the drawers by size, the way you do, 12-month on top and the 18-month underneath, and at the bottom of the box, under a folded sleeper he had almost outgrown, I put the paper bracelet. Not in the file. Not in the safe deposit box with the certified copies. In with his clothes, because that is the box I would carry out myself. My phone lit up on the dresser. Rusk. The lab has his sample. Now we wait." I typed 4 words back and turned the screen face down. Downstairs the printer was going. Anders was standing over it in the dark kitchen with the lid of it open, feeding it a second ream, printing something long. I walked past him to get water. I did not ask what it was. I did not slow down. I said it under my breath, on the stairs, to nobody, and I'm only telling you because it's true. Let him keep signing. Adrian moved in on the 15th. I still had 6 weeks in the house. That was the arrangement. That was in the draft he was so pleased with. She came with 3 suitcases and a garment bag on a Wednesday afternoon, and she hung her things in the empty half of my closet. And at some point that evening she stood in my kitchen with her hand on the coffee maker and asked warmly whether I'd mind if she moved it to the other side of the sink. She said the light was better there in the mornings. I said the outlet on that side is on the same breaker as the microwave. Then I looked at the calendar hanging on the side of the refrigerator, at the small pencil circle around September, for about 1 second. Then I went and got my son up from his nap. Rusk asked me that week for the exact date the other woman's things came into the house. I gave it to her. She wrote it down and said 1 word, parenting, and moved on to something else. On the 22nd of July, the pediatric office called me at work to confirm a request. That's the word the girl on the phone used. Confirm. She was young and reading off a screen, and she had no idea what she had in her hands. The father had submitted a form asking that his name be removed from the father field in my son's medical record. She just needed to know whether the mother was aware. I was standing in the corridor outside the file room with a stack of prior authorizations against my hip. She read me my son's name off her screen, then she read me the field, and then, because the form had already been keyed in and was sitting there in front of her waiting on somebody's approval, she read me what the field said now. Unknown. Emery Quinlan, 1-year-old, father, unknown. I told her not to process it, that counsel would be in touch, and thank you, and I hung up before she could say anything else. Then I went out to my car and sat in it with the engine off. That is the second time in my life I have sat in a parked car while somebody in a building decided what I was. I put my hand up to my cheek without meaning to, and it was the same hand and the same side of my face, and I was 29 years old. I sat there for 11 minutes. Then I wiped my face with the back of my wrist, opened the calendar on my phone, scrolled forward, and typed 1 line into the 11th of August. I didn't call Rusk. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't say it out loud in the car, because there was nobody in the car. I just put it on the day, and then I drove back inside and finished my shift. The official result came back that same day. Accredited lab, sealed collection, documented chain of custody, his money, 0%. He had it in his hand for 2 hours before he did anything with it, and what he did with it was post the entire PDF into the family chat. Not a screenshot this time. The document, with the laboratory's letterhead on it, and the accession number, and the collection date, and the name and license number of the director who signed it. And then, because he could not leave it alone, he forwarded that same PDF to the board of Larkspur Lane Early Learning Center, with a note saying he hoped this cleared my aunt's name since she had been put through so much for telling the truth. He sent a chain of custody document with embedded metadata to a public board. He sent it to an institution that keeps minutes. I was standing at my desk at work when my phone showed me the forward, and I want to describe exactly what my body did, because it did almost nothing. I ran my thumb once along the edge of the certified stack in my bag, the way you check that a knife is where you left it. That was all. High as a man whose entire profession is knowing which document goes to which authority, and he had just put his own evidence into the hands of 2 organizations that could be ordered to produce it again, from their own files, under their own names, with dates attached. 2 days later, I was in Rusk's office with 4 things on her desk. 4 packets, each one addressed, each one complete, each one unsent. The first was a complaint to the State Board of Accountancy. The second went to the compliance partner at his own firm and to his professional association, not to a single client of his. And I want that understood because Rusk asked me twice and I told her twice. You do not go around a firm to its clients. You go to the body that is required to go find them. The third was a report to the Colorado Department of Public Health. The fourth was for the federal office that registers tissue establishments. Rusk squared them and did not touch a stamp. "Not yet," she said, and reached over and drew a circle around the 11th of August on the desk calendar. "Here, the day after." I asked her the day after what. She started to answer. She said, "What they haven't thought about is that once a person has consented in writing, then—" And Emery, in the chair beside me with a paper cup, put his whole arm through it, and there was water across the desk and across the top packet, and by the time we had it mopped and he had stopped crying about his sleeve, Rusk was talking about parking validation. I know now what the rest of that sentence was. I did not know it in that office, and neither did the man on the other side of town who was, at that moment, calling a benefits line. I found out about the insurance at 9 o'clock at night at a pharmacy counter, holding a screaming baby with an ear infection. The girl behind the register said it twice, apologetically, "Not covered," then "Not active." She turned the monitor a few degrees so I could see it myself, which was kind of her. And there it was, the group plan, terminated as to dependent, effective the 30th. I had done it through the employee portal. The reason he had chosen off the drop-down menu was dependent no longer eligible. He had done it on the 30th of July, 8 days before the dissolution paperwork was served on me, and a week before he filed it at all, which meant there was no automatic order in place yet, which meant it was not, technically, a violation of anything. I was very good at 8 days. I paid $118 in cash for eardrops and a bottle of infant ibuprofen. I carried my son out to the car. I got him into the seat, and I got both arms through the straps, and I pulled the chest clip up to his armpits and pressed it until it clicked, and I checked it with 2 fingers the way you're supposed to. Then I stood in the parking lot with my hand still on the door frame and let my face do what it wanted to do for about 15 seconds. Then I got in and texted Rusk one line, "Note today's date for me." She wrote back, "Already did." Then I sent her the photograph of the screen, the termination line, and the reason underneath it. And she wrote back a 3rd time, later at night, than she writes back to anybody, "Keep that. Dependent no longer eligible is a written statement to a plan administrator." On the 5th of August, a statement came to the house. It came to the house because I was still on the notification list at that address, which is a thing people forget about in the same way they forget which breaker the microwave is on. It was a transfer out of the client trust account at Holloway and Strand, $22,000. The memo line said retainer. He had taken $22,000 of other people's money to pay the lawyer who was going to tell a judge that my son did not exist. I sat down on the 3rd stair with the envelope on my knees. There was a hole in that account before this. I'd known there was something for over a year. The way he handled the mail, the way he'd stopped talking about the firm's Christmas thing, the specific quality of his silence when a partner's name came up. $138,000, it turned out, papered over with backdated engagement letters. But I did not know the figure that night, and I did not know who had been backdating. What I knew was that he had just added $22,000 to whatever it already was, 5 weeks before an independent review. I photographed the page. I did not call a single client of his. I did not say one word to him about it. Not that night, not ever. I texted Rusk 4 words. The number changed, again. I was served on the 7th of August, at work, at 2 in the afternoon. A polite man in a golf shirt came to the front desk and asked for me by my full legal name, and our receptionist walked him back to my desk instead of putting him in the conference room, because she is 19 and nobody had ever taught her that part. Petition for dissolution of marriage, filed the day before, stamped, with the automatic temporary orders clipped to the top sheet. Those orders are 2 pages of plain English, and they say, among other things, that neither party may cancel or alter any insurance covering the parties or the children. I read that clause standing at my desk with 11 people pretending to look at their monitors. My son had been off his father's plan for 8 days by then. 8 days before that man in the golf shirt found my desk. 7 before the paper in my hand existed at all. He had done it in the window where it was only a thing a man does, not a thing a man violates. That is not luck. Nobody stumbles into an 8-day margin. I photographed both pages and sent them to Rusk with the date of the termination underneath, and she called me back inside 4 minutes, which she had never done. "Keep the pharmacy receipt," she said. "It's in the file." "Keep the bag it came in," she said, "with the staple in it. I want the whole thing, not a copy of the whole thing." I said okay, and I put the phone down, and I got back to a stack of prior authorizations for other people's children and worked until 6. He came to me for the last signature on the 9th of August. The final version, bound, tabbed, printed on the heavy paper he likes. He was so relaxed that he read parts of it out loud at my own kitchen table, tapping the clauses with a pen the way he'd walk a client through a return. Then he got to the new one on page 5 and read it out in full, pleased with himself, because he thought it was housekeeping. The wife releases and waives any and all claims against any third party in connection with the conception. I looked up from the page. He kept going for a second and a half before he registered that I had stopped. A man who believes that boy is not his son has no reason on this earth to know that there is a third party. A man who has been lied to by his wife does not draft protection for the person who helped her. He had just written it down in a document that he had brought to me and read aloud. I put the pen down on the table, and I did not pick it up, and I said the only sentence I said to my husband that whole month. "I'm not signing that." 4 weeks, a woman's suitcases in my closet, a laboratory report in front of a school board, my son's name pulled off an insurance plan, and $22,000 of a stranger's money. Every one of those was a line with a date on it. And the sentence he had just read out loud, in his own draft, in his own voice, was the 5th. On the 10th of August, his attorney filed the laboratory report into the court record. Not just the report. Under it, as the filing requires, a sworn affidavit from my husband that he had never been informed of any donor material, that he had never consented to the use of any donor material, that he had learned of the child's parentage only this summer, and that he had, upon learning it, acted promptly. Signed, dated, notarized, filed. I read it on my phone at the kitchen table at 10 at night, and I read it twice, and then I put the phone down and went to bed and slept better than I had in 6 weeks. The next morning, the 11th, I dropped Emery at daycare at 7:40, and then I drove to 3 buildings and stood in line at a 4th counter, which was a post office. The first envelope went to the State Board of Accountancy. The second went to the compliance partner at Holloway and Strand, hand-delivered at the front desk, with a copy to his professional association. Not to his clients. I never contacted a client, not one, not ever. You do not go around an institution. You hand it the thing it is required to act on and let it go find its own people. The third went to the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Complaint against a licensed facility with certified copies attached, both departments, both timestamps. The fourth I sent certified, return receipt requested, to the federal office that keeps the registry of tissue establishments, and I watched the clerk stamp the little green card and hand me back the stub. 4 envelopes, 1 morning. Rusk had picked that date, and I still did not entirely understand why, standing in the last lobby with my hands empty. What I understood was the order of operations. He had put his story into the record on the 10th, sworn, under his own signature. You cannot unswear a thing. I was home by 11:15, which meant I made Emery's lunch myself instead of the daycare doing it, and he threw most of it on the floor. It took 1 day. Garrett Holloway is 55, has been the managing partner for 9 years, and has the particular gift of never once raising his voice at anybody. He called my husband into his office on the 12th and locked his access to the client trust account before Anders had sat down. Not after the meeting, before. A man in the next room did it on a laptop while Garrett was still saying good morning. Adrienne Pike was removed from the billing system the same afternoon. I have thought about that a great deal since. She built a career out of putting the correct date on other people's paper. She sat in her car in that parking lot at 4 in the afternoon and could no longer enter a date into anything. Anders called me 11 times in 2 hours. I didn't pick up. I forwarded his number to Rusk's office and let the office send the letter that says all further communication goes through counsel. At 8 that night, he texted a single line, and I will give him this. It was the first honest sentence he had sent me all summer. "What did you do?" Rusk called the next morning about something else entirely. His financial disclosures had come in with his affidavit on the 10th, 6 years of statements, sworn, because in this state you do not get to ask a court for anything without them, and her paralegal had been going through them a month at a time. There was a wire out of my husband's own account in May of 2019, $6,000 to an individual with no invoice behind it and no client file it belonged to. I wrote the figure on the back of a daycare receipt and put it in my bag. It would be 3 days before I found out what it had bought. On the 13th, Rusk filed one more motion. 4 pages, no adjectives in it. Temporary possession of the marital residence to the parent exercising day-to-day care of the child, pending final orders. The court signed it that afternoon. They were out by Friday. He took the good chair and the television, and Adrian carried the coffee maker down my driveway herself, and I watched a woman who had wanted it moved to the other side of the sink carry it out with both arms. That night I plugged the toaster into the outlet she had complained about and pushed the lever down, and nothing anywhere in the house went dark. On the 14th, an inspector named Vernon Ridley signed an order. I got a copy by email at 4 in the afternoon while I was in the daycare pickup line with the window down. Mercy Ridge Fertility Center. Immediate suspension of operations pending investigation. Records sequestered. Embryology director relieved of duties as of that date. And that was the first time I ever saw the name Rosalind Keefe printed anywhere, sitting in a car line with my hazards on. And then the 4th paragraph, which I had to read twice because I kept trying to make it mean something smaller. The facility was directed to notify every patient whose records showed evidence of alteration. Directed, not permitted, not encouraged. Ordered by the state, on a deadline, in writing, with 10 days given to the facility to produce the list of names it had never expected to have to write down. The line at the daycare moved and somebody behind me tapped their horn. I closed the email. I did not think about that paragraph again for 2 days, and I want to be honest with you about why. Because my hearing was the following week, and because I am not a better woman than anyone else, and because when you have been on the floor for 7 weeks and someone finally turns the machine on, all you can hear is the machine. I saw Rosalind Keefe's face for the first time on the 10 o'clock news. 2 days after the order, a Denver station ran 90 seconds on it. A reporter standing in front of a locked glass door with a state notice taped inside it, saying the words, fertility center and suspended and altered records in the specific sing-song they use when they know a story is going to travel. They put up a photograph of the embryology director, a staff page picture, 5 or 6 years old, lab coat, a lanyard, a professional half smile in front of a beige wall. 58 years old, 22 years at that center. I sat on the end of my bed with the sound low and looked at a woman I had never met, who had never met me, and who had stood in a room 100 feet from where I was unconscious and made a decision about my son with a pencil. $6,000. That is not even a car. That is a bathroom remodel. That is what it cost to reach into the paperwork of a stranger's family and write over the part that says where a person comes from. I did not feel triumphant, and I did not feel sorry for her. I felt something flatter than both, which I have not found a good word for in a year of trying. They cut to weather. Emery coughed once through the monitor and settled. And somewhere south of me, in a town I could not have found on a map that week, a letter with that woman's work in it was already in the mail, addressed to a house where a girl had been writing to that building for 2 years. The pre-trial hearing was on a Monday morning in a small courtroom with bad carpet. His attorney was good. He put the laboratory report up like a winning ticket. Accredited, chain of custody documented, 0%, no possibility of error. And he asked the court to disestablish my husband's paternity and terminate any support obligation on the spot. Rusk did not object to any of it. She let him finish. She agreed the lab was accredited. She agreed the chain of custody was clean. She said the report was not in dispute. Then she put 3 things on the table. The first was the consent for use of donor gametes, dated the 21st of May, 2019, open to the 3rd box. Spouse. Anders Quinlan, in his own hand, the same signature that is on the affidavit he had filed 7 days earlier. The second was the anesthesia record, 805, not responsive to verbal from 807. Certified by a separate department. On paper, his side had never requested and had no idea existed. Against a consent form executed at 8:41. 36 minutes. The third was a photograph off my phone, printed at a copy shop for 11 cents. A page of a laboratory inventory log with a donor lot number written over in pencil, 2251, initials beside it, RK05-2019. The lot had been withdrawn from use years before. 5 embryos, the summary block on that consent form said, out of a lot that was not supposed to exist anymore. Someone had put its number back onto a shelf in May of 2019 to cover a hole in the inventory, and the price of doing it, which had come out 4 days earlier in a bank record, was $6,000. His attorney asked for a moment to confer with his client, and Rusk said the sentence I had been carrying without knowing I had it. Your Honor, in this state, a spouse who consents in writing to assisted reproduction is the legal father regardless of genetics. That statute does not have a genetics exception. The window to challenge is open only to a man who never consented. She put 2 fingers on the consent form. This result does not prove he isn't the father. It proves he has known since 2019. And if counsel now tells this court that the page is void because my client never signed it, then counsel is telling this court that his client paid $6,000 to have it made. He does not get to buy a defect and then inherit the benefit of it. Either way, he signed it. Either way, he carried that boy home and called him his son for a year, in a yard, in front of 31 people, at a first birthday party. Her hand went back to the legal pad on the table in front of her, the same yellow pad she had been carrying since July, and I looked down and read, upside down, the 2 words she had written on the 9th and turned face down that afternoon. I thought she was telling me to be patient. Let him. My husband could not win that motion without proving he had never signed that page, and every single document he had filed to win it. The affidavit, the lab report he paid for, the retainer he funded existed only because he had. He sat down slowly, the way people do when the chair is not quite where they thought. It had already started moving before that, and it moved the way water moves. Adelaide's name went to the district attorney's office on the 12th, 5 days before I ever sat down in that courtroom, named as the witness of record in the criminal referral, the state health department attached to my complaint. It took the school board 4 days. She was dismissed on a Friday. Her director's certification for a licensed child care facility was suspended pending the outcome. Every consent file that school had collected since the year 2000 went into review, which meant a woman in a district office started opening drawers and reading signatures, 1 child at a time. My aunt came to my door for the first time in 7 weeks. She had done her hair. She had brought a foil pan of something. She said, through the 6 inches I gave her, that I was on a table, that I was unconscious and somebody had to sign or they would have thrown out the whole cycle. That she did it for me, that she has spent her entire life doing things for people who never once said thank you, and that she would do it again tomorrow. I did not raise my voice. I did not tell her what she was. I said, "You wrote the word aunt in that box. Not nurse, not doctor, aunt. You knew exactly what you were signing, and you knew exactly who wasn't awake." Then I closed the door and put the chain on while she was still talking, and I listened to her say my name twice through 2 inches of wood, and then I went and got a bottle out of the warmer. 2 days after that, I drove 40 minutes south to Castle Rock, and I did it before Rusk filed the supplemental exhibits, not after. Ivy Fenn is my cousin. She is 35, cleans teeth for a living, and has a 6-year-old named Pearl, who was made in a cycle that a fertility center gave her mother's family for free in the last months of 2019. She did not know. I need you to hear that clearly, because I needed to hear myself say it out loud in her kitchen. Ivy Fenn did not know one thing about any of it. I told her the whole shape of it at her own table with the radio on low, the date, the box, what her mother wrote in it, and what arrived in her life 9 months later at no charge from the same building. She went the color of paper. Then I put down the thing I had driven there to give her, a sworn statement, signed by me, saying that to my knowledge Ivy Fenn had no awareness of any arrangement and had received no benefit she understood to be conditional. So that when this got large, and I knew by then it was going to get large, no investigator would ever have a reason to write her daughter's name down. She started crying and reached across the table for my hand. I did not take it. "I'm telling you once," I said. "I'm not the place you go to feel lighter." She pulled her hand back and nodded and said, "Okay," and she said thank you, and I drove home in the dark past the outlet malls with the radio off. 2 days later, Ivy stood on her mother's front step. She did not shout. Ivy has never shouted at anyone. She said one sentence, "I found out what Pearl cost," and then she went inside her own house and closed the door. And that afternoon, a locksmith's van sat in her driveway for an hour. My aunt traded a signature for a grandchild. She kept the grandchild for 6 years, and then she stood on a step in the afternoon and was not let in. That was the week my mother called me for the first time since July. Corinne could not make an apology come out. She started 3 of them. What she finally managed was to ask whether I needed somebody to watch Emery the day of the hearing, and I said yes, and neither of us said anything else about anything. And she was at my door at 7:40 on the morning of the 21st with a bag of cut-up pears. On the 19th, the State Board of Accountancy issued an emergency suspension of my husband's CPA license. Emergency. That word is in the order. It is the mechanism the board uses when it believes that leaving a man in possession of other people's money for the length of a normal proceeding is itself the danger. That same week, the federal office that governs who may represent taxpayers opened proceedings to strip Adrian Pike's enrolled agent credential. At 9 o'clock that night, he stood outside the house he had told me to leave. He didn't knock. He stood on the walk with his hands at his sides until I turned the porch light on, and then he looked up at the door with an expression I had not seen on him since the parking structure. "I don't have anything left to certify," he said. That was all of it. That was the whole confession, from a man who had spent 11 years telling people which numbers were real. It came after the board, after the firm, after the court, after the paper, not 1 hour before. I did not open the door. I reached over and turned the porch light off and let him stand out there in the dark on the walk of a house that a bank was about to have a very long conversation with him about. The next morning, an investigator from the State Board of Accountancy called me at 8:15. Her name was Priscilla Oyalaran, and she was extremely boring on the phone, which I have come to understand is what competence sounds like when it is aimed at somebody else. She was not calling about my marriage. She said that twice, gently, as though she were used to women trying to hand her the wrong story. She was calling about a single page, the trust account statement I had included with my complaint, the one that came to my house in August. She wanted to know how it had arrived, whether the mail came to that address in my name, whether I had opened it myself, whether I could confirm, in a written statement, the date and condition of the envelope. That was all she wanted. Not what he had done to my son, not the birthday, not the aunt, not the affidavit. One envelope, one date, one chain from a mailbox to her desk. I gave her a 4-sentence answer, and she thanked me and said someone would send a form. I sat on the edge of the bathtub after we hung up. Everything that was about to happen to Anders Quinlan was going to happen in that voice. Not in a courtroom with somebody shouting, in a series of extremely boring phone calls made by people with forms about a document he had put into the world himself and then stopped thinking about. He had spent a summer running his mouth to 22 relatives. Nobody at any of those 4 offices had asked me a single question about what he said. The night before the hearing, I put my own paper on Rusk's desk. I had written it myself over 4 evenings, in the language I read all day at work, and she went through it with a pen the way she goes through everything. He remains the legal father. His name stays on the birth record and in the medical file. Child support calculated on the standard income schedule. Parenting time supervised at a facility, at his expense, until further order. No removal of the child from the county without written consent. Any contact with the child's extended maternal family through counsel. Rusk read it twice and then looked up at me over her glasses. "You have everything you need to take his name off that certificate," she said. "Judges grant it. I could get it Thursday. Why are you handing him a father?" I thought about how to say it in a way that would sound like a legal position instead of what it was. Then I gave up and said the true thing. Because when I was 11, 4 adults decided the shape of my whole life in a living room I was not allowed into. It took 9 minutes. I have thought about that room every day since. I put my hand flat on the page. My son is not a weapon. I'm not going to hand him a version of his own history that got decided in a room he wasn't in either. He can read all of this when he's old enough, and then he can decide. Rusk did not argue with me. She capped her pen, peeled a fresh tab off the roll, wrote a number on it, and stuck it to the top of my page. The 21st of August was clear and already hot at 8 in the morning. My aunt came with a lawyer she was paying for out of her own pocket, and with nobody else at all. She wore the navy suit she wears to parent nights, and she sat in the back row of a courtroom with her purse on her knees, and not one person from that yard came with her. Not my mother, not a cousin, not one of the 31. She was called and sworn. Then Rusk read her own consent line back to her off the exhibit. The date, the printed name, and the relationship she had written in her own hand in the box provided, Aunt. Rusk asked her to confirm that was her signature. Her lawyer put a hand on the rail in front of him. She said yes anyway, because a signature is a thing sitting on a page and not a thing you say. Rusk asked her to confirm the time entered on that document. Her lawyer leaned in and said something into her ear, and my aunt looked at the front of the room and said, "On the advice of counsel, I decline to answer." The judge looked up from her file. She said that in a civil matter, a court may draw its own conclusion from a witness who will not answer, and that she would be drawing one. Then Rusk read the time into the record herself, 8:41. My husband's attorney stood and asked the court for a continuance, new material, complex records, the volume of exhibits. Judge Lorraine Wexler did not look up this time. Counsel, your client filed a sworn affidavit 11 days ago. He's had this record since 2019. Denied. At the recess, I went out into the corridor for water, and I saw them at the far end. An old man in a pressed short-sleeved shirt, sitting very upright on a bench, holding a manila envelope that had already been opened. Beside him, a girl in a high school track jacket with her hands between her knees. They were not waiting for a courtroom. They had asked at the window which one I was in, and the window had told them, because a docket is a public record, and anybody at all is allowed to read one. His name is Wendell Beaumont. He is 71, a retired electrician, and he had driven 112 miles up from Pueblo that morning with his granddaughter in the passenger seat. He held the envelope out to me and let me read it standing up. It was from Mercy Ridge. It was dated the 14th of August. It had arrived in his daughter's mailbox on the 17th, 3 days, first class, in state. The first paragraph said, in the flat voice of a legal department writing under duress, that the letter was being sent pursuant to an order of the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, not because they were sorry, because a state inspector had signed a paper making them. One of 1,206. The third paragraph said that records associated with donor lot 2251 had been found to contain alterations, and that the donor profile previously provided to the family should not be relied upon. I read that number twice. Then I looked up at the girl on the bench, and the machine that I had been so glad to hear running went quiet in my chest all at once. Her name is Calla Beaumont. She was 16 years old that August. She was conceived in the fall of 2009 from a donor lot her mother had chosen off a 2-page profile. Nadine Beaumont was 28 and single and had picked lot 2251 because the man in the profile had listed woodworking as a hobby, and her own father was a man who built things, and it seemed like a nice thing to give a child. That lot was withdrawn from circulation years afterward. In May of 2019, an embryology director with a shortfall on her shelf wrote that retired number back onto a vial and initialed the change in pencil, which is how a girl in Pueblo and a 1-year-old in Denver ended up sharing half of everything, and neither family ever knew the other one's name. I am saying that once, and I'm not going to explain it again. Calla had been writing to that center for 2 years. Letters, then a portal form, then more letters. She wanted to know where she came from, not the man, she told me later, the shape, whether anybody in it had her hands. She carried the printout of donor profile 2251 folded in 4 in her jacket pocket, and she could recite it. Height, blood type, the line about woodworking. The letter in her grandfather's hand told her that the file she had memorized had never been true. And there was one more thing, which I did not put together until her grandfather laid it out for me in that corridor, in the flat voice of a man explaining a circuit. The letter had a state complaint number printed at the bottom of it. He called that number on the 18th. The woman at the health department would not give him a name. She said so 3 times kindly. And then she told him, because it is not a secret, that the matter had gone to family court in Denver County. A docket is public. It took him 1 phone call, 1 clerk's window, and 112 miles. I told the 2 of them 3 things in that corridor, fast, because a recess is 10 minutes long. Whose case it was, what had been written over in pencil in May of 2019, and what a bank record said that pencil had cost, which was $6,000, and which the girl beside him made me say twice. I got everything I had asked for that summer, and it was mailed to a house I had never heard of by a state agency, at my request, in an envelope with my complaint number behind it. Then Calla stood up and walked past me down the corridor. Anders was at a table just inside the courtroom doors, with his back to the hallway, sorting exhibits with his attorney, and she went straight to the end of that table and put the folded printout down on it in front of him. She did not raise her voice. She sounded like any 16-year-old telling an adult something factual. "This is the man I thought I came from," she said. "I didn't know your name until Monday. I didn't know your face until this morning. But you knew what it costs to get someone in a lab to write over a label." Then she opened the folded paper out flat on the table, and she pressed the creases down with 2 fingers, one after another, until it lay open. And she left it there. My husband did not say 1 word. He looked at the paper and his mouth moved and nothing came out of it, and after a moment, his own attorney reached over and picked it up, because someone had to, and Calla was already walking away. I have been in 1 courtroom in my life, and I cried once, and it was not for anything he lost. Outside, she stopped in front of me. She had her hands in her jacket pockets, and she was working something out on the way over, and when she got there, she asked it carefully, the way you ask for a thing you have already decided you might not get. She said she wasn't asking for anything now. She said she knew he was a baby, but when Emery was old enough to understand what she was, not a secret, not a surprise, just a fact about himself, would I let him know she existed? And could she be told when that was? Would I let her? I have been in rooms my whole life where people decided things about me and then came out to tell me the answer. My father, my mother, 4 adults in a living room, a man at a records desk at 8:41 in the morning. A 16-year-old girl in a track jacket was the first person who ever asked me first. I said yes. I said it too fast and my voice did an ugly thing in the middle of it, and she pretended not to notice, which was a kindness she should not have had to know how to do. Inside, at 11:10, Judge Wexler pushed both attorneys' arguments aside with her hand. "Ms. Langford," she said, "this is your record. What do you want?" The court found my husband to be the legal father of my son under the written consent he executed on the 21st of May, 2019. Support on the income schedule. Parenting time supervised. No removal from the county. His affidavit was read into the record in full, out loud, by Rusk, with the court's leave, in his presence. And the file was referred to the district attorney's office. In the parking lot afterward, a woman got out of the Beaumont's car. Nadine Beaumont is 44 and a school nurse, and she had driven up separately after her shift and made it in time for none of it. She stood by her father's bumper with her keys in her fist and looked at me the way I imagine I looked at her. We did not hug. We are not that. She said her daughter had been reading that profile out loud to her since she was 14. She said she had chosen it in a waiting room in 19 minutes and had never once thought about it as a thing that could be taken back. I said I was sorry that a complaint with my name on it was the reason a letter came to her house. She thought about that for a second, honestly, the way a nurse thinks about a question. "No," she said, "you're the reason we got a real one." Then she got Calla into the car, and they drove 112 miles back south, and I went to a park and sat on a bench with my son for 2 hours because I could not make myself go home yet. In September, the federal inspectors went into Mercy Ridge. The center's tissue establishment registration was suspended. Rosalind Keefe's professional certification was revoked, and she was actually named, first and last, in a public report that anyone can pull up, as the individual who had altered inventory records over a period of years to conceal shortfalls. She will not touch a vial in a laboratory again as long as she lives. The report is 31 pages. I read all of it. There is a table on page 9 that gives the number of families notified under the state's order, 1,206. I read that line slower than I read anything else in the document. There is a second column beside it, narrower, for the families the center was not able to find. My own letter came on a Tuesday. Of course it did. I keep thinking I should have expected it, and I did not. I had been the person filing complaints for so long that it had stopped occurring to me that I was also a patient with a file. Same envelope, same date block, same sentence about being sent pursuant to an order. Records associated with your treatment have been found to contain alterations. The donor profile provided to you should not be relied upon. There was no donor profile provided to me. That was the joke of it, sitting on my own front step with my thumb through the flap. I had never been offered the 2-page sheet with the hobbies on it. I had never been in the room where you choose. I put my letter in the file with everything else, one of 1,206, in a drawer with the other 1,200 somewhere out there in kitchens I will never see. In October, the district attorney filed charges. Forgery of a document affecting a legal right, which is a felony in this state, and theft from a client trust account. The State Board of Accountancy converted the emergency suspension into permanent revocation. His professional association expelled him. Every engagement he had signed for a client went into review, which meant that for 11 weeks, somebody was reading his work the way he had once read everybody else's, and he was barred for life from holding funds in trust for another human being. Restitution of $160,000, the $138,000 that was already gone, plus the $22,000 he moved in August to pay the lawyer. Adrienne Pike lost her enrolled agent credential and was the only person the firm named individually when the clients came for their money. At Larkspur Lane, a district office finished reviewing every consent file the school had collected since the year 2000. It took until November. They found nothing else wrong, which my aunt tells people is her vindication, and which anyone who has ever been reviewed knows is not a thing you get to say about being reviewed. Ivy has not opened her door. Her mother's car was on that street twice in October, and both times it left again without anybody getting out of it. The first supervised visit was on a Thursday in October at a facility on the north side with beanbag chairs and a mirror that is not a mirror. I was not required to stay. I stayed anyway in the waiting room with my coat still on. They give you an hour. There is a woman with a clipboard in the corner who writes down what happens in short sentences with no adjectives in them, and a copy goes into the file and the file goes to the court. Emery did not remember him. He is a baby. That is not cruelty. That is just how many months it had been. He handed my son a stuffed elephant that still had the tag on it, and Emery took it politely and then carried it across the room and gave it to the woman with the clipboard. Because at that age you give things to whoever is looking at you. Anders sat on the floor in a facility playroom in a good shirt with his hands on his knees for 50 minutes. When it was over, he stopped at the desk on the way out and asked whether he could send the elephant home with him. The woman said any items given during the visit belonged to the child. He said of course. He said thank you very much. He was polite to her the whole way to the door. He has that hour every other week for as long as he wants it, and it is on my paper, and it is the only thing in this entire story that I could have taken away from him and didn't. Kala called on a Saturday afternoon in November. She had put in her applications, genetic counseling. She'd found a program with an early admissions track and had already emailed a professor twice, which is very much who she is. I asked her why that. So nobody has to read a piece of paper about where they came from, she said, and then find out somebody made it up. Emery is 16 months old. He has 11 words. One of them is her name, or his version of it, which comes out as 2 syllables and a lot of enthusiasm, and she makes him say it into the phone every single time. That afternoon I got the shoebox down, the hospital hat, the ultrasound strips, the concert ticket. I put the paper bracelet back in with them. Admitted 712, pre-anesthetic 805, a strip of paper a man once cut off my wrist in a parking structure and told me to keep, and I closed the lid and I put the box up on the high shelf in the closet. It has been evidence since June. It gets to be a keepsake again now. The white-handled cake knife is in the kitchen drawer with the peeler and the good scissors and a birthday candle that never got used. Outside the sliding door, the first snow of the season was coming down over the backyard, filling in the flat patch by the fence where a folding table stood on the 28th of June in front of 31 people while I finished cutting a cake. Here's the only thing I know now that I did not know then. The thinnest thing in a hospital is not a person's body. Everybody in that building is trained to protect the body. The thinnest thing in there is a person's ability to say yes. It lasts until about 8:05 in the morning, and after that, anybody with a pen can put a shape where it used to be, and the paper will look completely normal forever. And keeping the paperwork is not coldness. I used to think it was. I spent a long time believing that the women who keep folders are the women who have stopped loving anybody. It isn't that. It's how a person calls herself into the room. Nobody was ever going to open that door and invite me in. So I asked 2 departments for 2 documents, and I laid them next to each other on my own kitchen counter, and I let them talk. So let me ask you something before you go. If you were holding 2 pieces of paper that could not both be true, 2 dates, 2 signatures, 2 versions of a thing somebody told you about your own life, would you put them side by side on the table? Or would you put one of them away and keep the life you already had? Be honest with me in the comments. I've read everyone on the last of these, and I'll read everyone on this. Thank you for staying to the end with me. My son says one of your names better than he says mine, and I'm not going to tell you whose. I'll see you next time.